Most companies don't realize how many processes are part of their day-to-day business. That is until we need to onboard a new team member or even do a task or operation that we haven't done for a while. Then we face that massive speed bump in trying to figure out what needs to be done, not just generally, but the actual steps we need to take. That could be in completing a process or using software or hardware that we haven't used before or that we haven't used for some time. The solution is documenting each process. The challenge is actually getting team members to do this, not just once, but to continually update the documentation so that it is current and accurate. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here today on A Seat at the Table. It's great to have you as part of our growing international community that now includes industry leaders in over 100 countries. I'm delighted to welcome our colleagues from around the world who listen to this show to learn from the many outstanding people who share their insights, experience, and expertise. In this episode, we're going to hear from Owen McGab Enaohwo, CEO and co-founder of SweetProcess, a company that enables leadership and team members to more easily document processes so that they can scale their business. Owen will be talking about how to make process documentation ongoing without interrupting your workflow, why a collaborative approach to documentation can improve both the documentation and the processes themselves, and how prioritizing process documentation can help companies build much greater efficiency without having to invest a lot of time or money. Before we get started, if you are a supply chain executive who'd like to finally put an end to information overload and get a concise, fact-based summary of key market developments and shifts, as well as sharp insights as to what's likely to impact sourcing in the coming months, then the current situation in sourcing is exactly what you're looking for. To learn more, head on over to thecurrentsituation.net. That's thecurrentsituation.net, where you can get all of the details. I'll include the links in the show notes as well. Now let's sit down with Owen and find out about an easy way to document our processes and boost our productivity. Owen, I am really thrilled to have you on a seat at the table because I think what you're talking about is so important to people listening to this show. It's something I struggle with myself. I need to be more proactive about it. You talk about the fact that every company would benefit from having their processes documented. Wow, how true is that? But few actually do that. And especially for some of the procedures, right, that long-time team members take for granted, right? If you've been there a long time, you do something, you do it by rote, and then it's difficult to think back, what do I do step by step? So perhaps you can talk a little bit about how leadership can use some of the procedures you've developed to properly delegate repetitive tasks so that they can stop doing all this stuff themselves and as you point out, being the biggest bottleneck in their business.
Okay, so let me even clarify something because what we do have is a software called SweetProcess that makes it easy for employees and their managers and even the owners of the company to come together, collaborate to document procedures and also improve these documents. So we don't necessarily have procedures that we documented for them, but we created that platform. And what I would do today is kind of share a framework that the listeners can use to kind of go ahead and start documenting procedures on their own, regardless of whether these are software or not. And you're right. If you don't have these documents in place, they can become a situation where the listener becomes the biggest bottleneck in the business because maybe the listener is in that situation where people are asking them the same questions over and over and over again, and they're wishing to themselves, like, I wish there was a way they could just go to one single place and find the answers for this so they don't keep asking me. Or it could be like you're trying to hire new employees and you're dreading the whole idea of hiring the employees, even though you need them because you know the onboarding and training would just be so difficult. And this is where procedures come in place, because if you have procedures already in place, you know that onboarding is going to be straightforward because they can just jump into it and have the instructions right there in front of them. Another reason why you might even need this stuff is that maybe you have client work that you're doing and you're worried that, clients might end up having a situation where they're not being delivered the results they want because of mistakes being made by employees. But now, guess what? If you have procedures in place for how you guys deliver your work, then you don't have to worry about that because the employees can follow the instructions that you have in place. So if you want, I can go ahead and talk about the framework and we can go from there.
Yeah, I think that would really be interesting. And based on your experience, how can companies make the process of documenting procedures faster without compromising accuracy? Because I think that oftentimes is one of the stumbling blocks, right? Because it takes time. So people want to get a job done. And then sometimes the process that you need to document, actually people feel it's slowing them down. So how do you see that?
So here's the thing. People automatically think that when they want to document procedures that, first of all, it has to be this elaborate encyclopedia documents. And so now that even adds to the whole idea of procrastinating. So I want to just, first of all, install in the minds of everyone who's listening that this is going to be a continuous improvement project. So I'm giving you the permission to say, hey, we're starting from version 1.0, which will barely have any content in there. And yourself and your employees will go from that very scanty version of your procedures to something that has more flesh in there. Think of like a skeleton and you're adding flesh, muscles, and, more fat in there eventually. So that's the way we'll go about this. So the first thing, when you're trying to document procedures, instead of worrying about getting started to document, I would say the first thing you got to do is determine all the tasks that you do quite on a recurring basis, because you only need to document procedures for tasks that you do on a recurring basis. If it's a one-time thing, you never do it again, you're never going to have to worry about documenting procedure for it. That's more like a project. So for those tasks that you do on a recurring basis, that's, create a list of all those tasks. Now, the next thing is don't just document everything, because we don't want a situation where you're taking this tribal knowledge of how you've always done things before and start to document them. We want to have a conversation with ourselves and your team. Say, okay, which are the things we have on this list do we need to get rid of because we don't need to be doing them again, right? And so that's the first thing you need to do is get rid of all the tasks that you don't need to document so you don't have to worry about them. And now you'll be left with the recurring tasks that you do actually plan to document procedures for. Now, the next thing you're going to ask yourself is which of these tasks are the revenue generating tasks, which was the sales, the marketing tasks, the tasks that most of the entrepreneurs and even managers that listen to this call like because they know these ones bring in revenue, right? And then which of these tasks, on the other hand, are more of the production tasks, the tasks that enable us to deliver what we've promised to the customers that, we after we've gotten them as customers. Now, what I'm going to tell the listener is don't worry about documenting procedures for the revenue generating tasks, sales and marketing tasks initially, because yes, why? If you do that, you'll be tempted to, after you have documents in place, you'll be tempted to now go find people who can follow the instructions in your documentation so you can bring in more customers and more sales. But guess what? If you bring in more customers, you're going to end up having more people who are pissed because you have a lot of tasks that are bottleneck on the production side that you can't deliver, right? So that's why I'm like saying, put that to the side first. Now let's focus on the production side of things, right? So now you have a list of those. Now figure out which is the biggest bottleneck, which is the one that every time an employee asks you, how do I do this? It just pisses you off because, I wish they knew the answers to. Or it's a task that every time you're trying to work on it, you have to spend some time trying to figure out, how do I do it? Or some time trying to recollect, how do I do it? Like, you understand which one's your biggest bottleneck of your time. Now focus on that. So what do you do to document that very biggest bottleneck task as a production task? The first thing you got to do is at the time you're trying to work on the task, I think that's the best time to actually document it. And when you're documenting, what you have to do is think of just write down the title of the procedure, make it a title that anybody in your company sees the title, they will know exactly what they can accomplish with that task. And then as you are working on each step of the task, you want to write down the title of each of those steps. So now in this example, let's say you're working on a 10-step task. By the time you're done working on the task, you will have what I call a minimum viable procedure, which is just a fancy way of saying a procedure outline that has the title of the procedure and title of the 10 steps. And guess what? Nothing is filled into the procedure just yet. So no details filled in yet. So the reason why I asked you to do this while you're working on a task is it's the best time to kind of recollect and actually capture the information is while you're working on the task. So you're done working on the task. You have that procedure with the 10 steps. How do you go from there to having more details filled in? Now, of course, you've already brought in your managers and your employees into the idea that, hey, we're going to build this together, right? So the next time that any of them is supposed to be working on the task, the goal is for them to have that, version 1.0 of the document you have right there in front of them so that their job is to go in there and fill in the details of as many steps as they can while they're working on the task. So how much detail do they put into each step? Not that much. Just put in the barest minimum information. Can be text, screenshot, a small video for each step. Just something in there so that that procedure goes from the version 1.0 to something that has some details filled in. And when they do that, your job is to make sure that you come back and look at the document and look, okay, do you like what they did? If there's any improvements on top of what they just did, you can add into that as well. So what now happens is, anytime they're working on a task, they have that procedure in front of them. They try to add in as many steps as they can into the procedure and stuff like that. And so what also is going to happen is, as they're doing that, they're going to run across a situation that wasn't even encountered for when the document was originally built or has been improved. And then they can come back to you and say, hey, we think this procedure is missing several steps because while we're on the field, these things were not accounted for. And then you can take those instructions or those new additional information that they give to you, and you can go ahead and improve the documents, or they can improve it themselves. And while you have that management oversight, or it might be something that while they are working on a task, they discover that, hey, these 10 steps we're working on, maybe there's some kind of automation involved where now we don't even need these whole 10 steps. We may only need 2 steps. We only need 8 steps. So 2 of the steps can be gotten rid of. So you can see how we've gone from creating the first draft to working on tasks, getting feedback from employees, using the feedback to improve that document, so on and so forth. So now this is the dance you do to document the first one. Once you have the first one in place, now you look at the next biggest bottleneck on the production side. You do that same dance again, so on and so forth, until eventually you have documented most of those production tasks that we mentioned, right? You have documents in place. Now, we now have some free time to start looking at those revenue income generating tasks. Those tasks are the marketing and sales tasks that bring in customer. And you can do that same dance on those tasks. And guess what? When you now have some of those, your income generating tasks documented, you can also now go out and find employees that can come in, be onboarded quickly and faster because you have documents in place showing how you do your sales and marketing, and then go and achieve the same, maybe the same result or close to the same result as you would if you were handling sales and marketing yourself. But at least now they can take these instructions and do the same thing. But you will have peace of mind knowing that when you have customers that come in as a result of them following the instructions that you've documented, you know that on the production side, there will be no issues because you have employees who are handling those production tasks and there's instructions in place already for them to follow. And so customers come in and have a great experience. And so this is the dance you follow for documenting and improving the documents. You see how I mentioned how you can do it, the framework to do it, but then you also need to make sure that you have a tool that was built in place to make sure that this whole dance of documenting, collaborating on improving the documents, and also capturing information as people are doing the actual work. You make sure you have a tool that actually, was built to do all of that. And that's what SweetProcess actually helps with. So you can use any tool and use that framework, or you can just use SweetProcess that was built for that. But now someone that might be listening to this might also think, okay, I get it. I know I can get my employees to help me, but what if for some reason my employees are not available or they're too busy? One of the things I would tell you is, hey, you got to make it a cultural thing where they understand that part of their role is to document procedures and improve the documents as part of their role. And as a matter of fact, if they feel like maybe they're too busy, well, maybe you can incentivize them by paying them extra for, helping to build and create this document. Some companies go to the extent where they actually have specific employees who their job is just to do that. Maybe they can hire an operations manager, or they can hire a chief operating officer where their job is just to make sure operations run smoothly. And there's no way you can scale and run operations, especially for things that human beings have to do without having these documents in place. And so, sometimes some companies go as far as hiring dedicated employees who their job is to oversee this. But another thing too that you can have handy is that, hey, let's say no one in your company is available to do this, or you can't even hire somebody dedicated to do this. There are people called process consultants that companies hire on to come in, look through their systems, just basically follow the same framework I mentioned to go through how all the different systems and procedures they have in their company, and even help them document new ones. So that's a third option that you can have where you can bring in outside consultants to come in and do that. Granted, it's going to be more expensive, but I'm just laying the ground for all the different things that you can do to get this done?
Right. Well, I like the fact that the system encourages the actual user to do the documentation, because I find, as someone who uses a tremendous amount of technology and apps and so forth, that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes when documentation is not done by someone who's using it, there's things that have been skipped that you don't really know until you get into it, right? So you'll be following it along, you get to a certain step, and there's sort of a gap between the previous step and the next one. And I'll figure it out myself, but then I'll make my own notes. But I think that you have that system that will enable a user to add that in so that the next person who comes along, or if they come back to use it again, you have that notation in there. I think that's really important, because I don't know that people who write directions for things or procedural documentation are as aware of that. But it is very, very important in order for people to be able to use those directions. So I like the fact that it's done that way.
I was going to ask if you could permit me to give you a backstory of how we even came across the need for that, because it didn't just happen happenstance. What happened was, before we even built SweetProcess, right? This was back in 2013. I used to have a company where I would provide people with a back office staff. So if they need people to do work for them, they would come to me and then, outsource their work to us. And the problem was that they would think they could do it magically. But in order for you to do that, you need to have procedures documented. And so we would meet on Skype, have them talk about that task, record that conversation, and then someone on my team would take that conversation and try to document procedures. But the issue we had back then was the tools were either they were enterprise level tools for the standpoint of documenting, and so they were hard to use for us or even the client that we have, or we were basically hacking together a bunch of different tools. So long story short, I somehow, through being on a podcast, I met my co-founder all the way from Australia. He had the idea of building software to document procedures. And so we said, okay, let's do this together. And I said, instead of you just going ahead to build the software, why don't we spend time having conversations with potential customers? So we did like over 30 plus, I think about 40 plus interviews with potential customers just to understand this issue of, how do you build something that you can have a single place where employees can go and find instructions on how to do their work. And some of the findings we learned during that conversations with potential customers before we built the software was that not only does the software have to be easy to use to document and improve the actual documentation, but there should be a way in which when work is being done, the actual work being done based on the documents, there needs to be a marriage between that part as well, because what's going to end up happening is people are going to end up doing work. And if there's no way for them to pass the feedback, the insights, the issues they have while they're doing the work back to the same document, the same software where they used to document the underlying procedures, then you lose all that magic. So we learned during those interviews that, hey, not only do we have to build the software for documenting, but our software also has to be the software for the actual carrying out of the task. So I had to give that backstory so that you understand why it's necessary for those to be together, because otherwise you're counting on this employee being so proactive to, remember while they're on the ground that they came across something that the procedure didn't encounter to come back to you and remind you, which honestly would not be the case for most people. But if the software was built so everything was all handled in the same place, it's just a click of a button. They can tell the manager that, hey, this doc procedure that I'm using to do this very, very task doesn't cover this step I'm encountering right now. The manager can, oh, that's true. Go ahead and improve that procedure and add maybe the step now that encounters for that situation that the employee is facing right there on the ground while he's carrying out that task. And with one click of a button, that underlying procedure is improved as that new step, and the employee can carry out that new step and check off that task while he's working on the task. So I had to give that background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it's interesting how you came to this conclusion of the best way to get this done. Now, is this an app? Is SweetProcess an app that runs alongside? Like, is it browser-based? Is it desktop-based? Assuming that you are using this, how would that work?
So great question. So it is a desktop, and also we also have mobile phone apps in the sense of iOS and Android. right? So that if you're on the ground doing some work and you're not accessible to your desktop or laptop, you can just write from your mobile phone, able to just get access to the information you want. Like, I give you an example. Some of our customers are like manufacturers. They manufacture food and stuff like that, right? And so on the ground, when the employees are on the site trying to do stuff with specific machines, they can generate a QR code from SweetProcess, and that shows step by step how to run that machine. And they would have the QR code on the machine. And when the employee is on that part of the manufacturing plant, takes his mobile phone, his smartphone, takes the camera, scans that QR code, something pops up on the camera, on the screen, it clicks on it, it opens that very procedure inside of SweetProcess. So the employee now knows step by step how to do it. So yes, you can use SweetProcess from your desktop, from your mobile phone, as I explained just now. And so it's a situation where at any given time, the employee has that single one place to find the instruction that they are looking for.
Yeah, I think that's really excellent, because that's always the problem with making it easy for people to access those directions. But also, if you want someone to document something and they need to get a job done, and then they have to go hunting around for, where do I find the app? And how do I have that open while I'm trying to do my job? So the fact that you figured out how to make them work in tandem is really important, because that'll help, I believe, to facilitate people to actually utilize it. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah. And with regards to scale, this actually allows the company to scale, because imagine if you don't think of it from like, if you were like a person who's trying to buy a business, right? So which business would you want to buy? The business where it depends solely on the owner of the company, where if this owner leaves, everything will probably crumble, or the company where everything has been documented, everything has systems, especially for those tasks that human beings have to do, everything is documented, that people literally have instructions for all the different roles and all the different tasks. And so now that business is scalable, meaning that if an employee leaves for one other reason, for whatever reason, another employee can come in or from within the company be promoted up and take over that task without any issues, because there's documentation in place for that role that needs to be replaced. Or you can bring in somebody new into the company. So from a scalability standpoint, it scales. And then from a value standpoint, the buyer who we're talking about now, obviously, it will be more interested in buying a company where it doesn't depend on the owner knowing everything, because everything is already in place, has been documented, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's really the critical thing, is that ability to onboard, but also the fact that there's tasks that you might not do every day. But I find myself that there's things that I do, not just a one-off, as you said earlier, as a project, but things that I may have to do once a month. And, oftentimes one of the sticking points of getting on to the next thing is you have to get back into, okay, so how do I do that? And it's not that you don't know, but because you don't do it every day, you have to stop and think. Whereas if you can, I keep these rough guides for myself, or I document processes, but I think the system that you have is obviously very, very professional and quite purpose built, whereas mine are just, random notes. But it is that fact that you come back to something, you haven't done it for a while, and it really helps to be able to immediately open something that's documented everything step by step. So I think that for onboarding, of course, that's absolutely critical. It's game changing. But even for people in the organization who have many, many different things that they need to do, to be able to just say, oh yeah, I did this a couple of months ago. Okay, let me just open that up. I think that's absolutely hugely beneficial.
Let me even make sure that point you just made hits home even more for the listener right now. So imagine you've not done a task in a while and you are in the flow of actually trying to do something. And now you realize, oh, I can't remember how I used to do this. So Now you stop the flow of trying to do the work. Now you have to spend time trying to figure out how to do the work. Now you have to gather all the information you need to do the work. Now, this is time being spent you not doing the work, which means you're not being as efficient as possible. Now, multiply this same thing happening over and over again with all your different employees, all your different contractors, because they don't have the instructions all in one place, and they have to try and search all the different places potentially they might be, or they might not even be. Then now add even the fact that now they can't even depend on going down to the office, the next office, to talk to another employee because of a lot of, like, as you know, a lot of people right now are working remotely. So it is even more, the need for this is even more enhanced because people are working remotely and they don't even have the instructions in front of them to do their work. What do you think is going to happen? Way more work time being spent trying to figure out the work, and at the end of the day, not doing anything. So now it's even more critical to have a system like SweetProcess in place where you look for something, just go inside there, type whatever you think it is, and voila, you see the answer right there. Get started to doing your work. You don't have to worry about trying to find stuff.
Yeah, that's really critical. Now, is this a subscription-based service, or is this a program that people would buy? How does that work?
So great question. So yes, it's a subscription-based service. And one of the things we try to do with our pricing is we try to be very fair. Like unlike our competitors where they charge a per user where, let's say you have 100 employees, you added to their software, but this month only 20 employees actually use the software. With our competitors, we'll pay for all 100, regardless of the fact that 80 did not use it. For us, we think that's not fair. So what we do is we have a base price that covers it's $99 a month that covers up to 20 employees. So if you have one employee using the software, you pay the $99. If you have 10, you still pay the $99. If you have 20, you still pay the $99 for that month. But then if you have more than the 20 employees that's covered in the package using it, there is a additional fee of $5 per user. But here's the caveat. The additional fee is only charged if our software deems these additional employees as actually active users.
Right.
And so for an employee to be considered active within our system, this is above the 20 users that comes with the package. That employee literally has to have been using SweetProcess at 4 different intervals or 4 different days within the month for us to consider them active. So 4 or more. So what that means is, think about this. If someone is actually coming to the software and using it on 4 different occasions and 4 different days in a month, you can begin to say, okay, this user is actually using this software, getting value from it, versus someone who never came in or maybe came in once a month. We don't feel that's active. So what now happens is, in the example I gave earlier, that the employee, your listener added 100 employees this month, they don't have to worry about being charged per user for all 100 who didn't, of course, 80 of them didn't use it. They'll only be charged this month for the 20 that use this, which will be the $99 for the month.
Wow. That's very impressive. Now, Owen, you've shared so many interesting things. How can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
So you can meet me online on as a matter of fact, I'm so easy to reach out to Owen@sweetprocess.com. But one of the things I want to leave with the listeners is because I shared a framework on how you can document procedures, but maybe you might want to have something handy. So we have 52 standard operating procedure templates that you can check out and look, download the PDF, and, it can be a starting point for you to build some procedures and give you ideas. So to get access to this one right now, you can go to sweetprocess.com. So sweet like candy, process like process, or sweetprocess.com/a seat at the table. So basically the name of this podcast. And I repeat it again, is sweetprocess.com/a seat at the table. And then you get access to this.
Well, I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes. And of course, they'll be over on our website as well for the podcast so that people can find it easily. And I want to thank you so much for coming on a seat at the table and sharing so much valuable information. I've learned a tremendous amount from you, and I'm sure that most of the people listening have also.
Jane, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of industry information being dumped onto your desk or into your inbox, then take a look at the current situation, where supply chain execs get only the news they really need, summarized so that they can reclaim their time and their inboxes. You can learn more at thecurrentsituation.net. That's thecurrentsituation.net. Before you go, don't forget to check the Seat at the Table's website. You'll find all of the previous podcast episodes, other useful information, as well as how to contact us. You can find it at seatpodcast.net or in the show notes. That's all for now. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.